8 straight defeats, 2 goals in 6 games, no points at all since Boxing Day. Derby County, Dr Norwich will see you now. Welcome to this week's edition of the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast. I'm your host Connor Southwell, joined by Seaman, Paddy Davitt and Adam Harvey. This podcast, of course, brought to you in association with First Bus. And, sometimes I say, where do we start with that? Because there's so much we can talk about. Today we will do our best to make sense of everything that happened at Carrow Road if you didn't quite snore off, I guess, at one point in that first half. But Paddy, I guess frustration, that's probably the overriding emotion, isn't it? Because a lot of people look to this game with new players coming in, with players coming back from injury, with the depth of options that Norwich City had, probably their strongest 20 of the season so far, and it failed to deliver.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, we don't really need to expand it beyond Johannes's post-match delivery, what he said, how he said it, and he was as I thought you pointed at me there, Connor, which will mean nothing for our audio listeners, but he was a frustrated, disappointed. He used that word a few times. At pains, and we'll obviously get into the weeds of it, not just to solely focus on Jack Stacey's aberration to concede that stoppage-time penalty, but the first half, which he thought was way below what they were capable of. Second half, better, but still not as sharp as they have been on the ball. But yeah, bit of a sobering one. That off the back of all that positivity on the pitch, and then in the past few days, with what they did at the back end of the transfer window, having those players available. Then Johannes confirming on Friday that Slimani and Nunes were available after injuries. Cordoba coming back in. Yeah, I wouldn't dispute that probably was as strong a 20 as I think we've seen named, but it certainly didn't translate into the top performance you would have expected. And of course, there's the Derby element to this and the Paul Warne factor and his removal and what it may have done to galvanise that group of players who came here without a win in 7, without a point in 7 league games. But even allowing for that element, nowhere near. And as I say, that's not us really talking in those terms. That was the head coach of Norwich talking in those terms. So for me, if he's not happy with what they've served up, then I think it's safe to say that most fans, I think, would have gone away with the same frustrations. And it's not definitively a blow to their top 6 aspirations, but tonight with that win they do go into the top 6. First time this season that would have been, and that would have just added more momentum into what felt like they were really starting their run for home, and it's obviously just because of the manner of how that game's ended, feels like they've just blew an opportunity there. And as Johannes said, there'll be more disappointments down the stretch, but he can deal with drawing games, losing games if he feels he's got the most from his team. And I think today, by common consent, that wasn't Norwich at their best.
No, agreed, and we will of course get into that. I think it's worth saying it. As you said, Paddy, they didn't lose today. It wasn't a disaster by any stretch of the imagination. It was a poor result in isolation, but still 7 from 9. I think if you swap the results around, so if they'd have drawn at Watford and won today, maybe there is a slightly different feeling to it. So I think it is important to retain that sort of long-term view on it. But it is difficult to immediately a couple of hours after the game to zoom out wider than what you've seen on a Saturday, and I appreciate that. And it was that, Sam, because as much as the headline is going to be about Jack Stacey and the decision that he made or maybe shouldn't have made to raise his boot inside the penalty area after 90 minutes to connect, or maybe not even connect with Marcus Harness's head, there are going to be a lot of fans talking about that. But I think the bigger picture is what Johannes said, which was for 89 minutes Norwich City were really off colour.
Yeah, and it's the sort of performance that you struggle to explain, really, because there were so many factors going in Norwich's favour going into the game. It almost felt uncomfortable, the extent to which there was no mitigation whatsoever on the expectation that they would win this one. So it's really hard to put your finger on what went wrong. The only factor maybe that you could point to would be complacency, but I don't think that's something that we've necessarily seen much from this group, and it's certainly something that Thorup was keen to guard against in his pre-match press conference. So yeah, it's just really hard to put your finger on it. I suppose it is still an inconsistent team, and when things shape up the way that they have, with regards to the playoff push, or the chances of Norwich getting into the playoffs, it all felt like actually for a bit you could forget about the long term, and in the short term this team might be good enough to achieve things, and it was easy to get ahead of yourself. But I suppose what we need to remember in the bigger picture is that this is still quite an average championship team that's trying to shape up to be a good championship team, and one that is still in transition. So I think today's result and performance was probably a reminder that they will still be inconsistent, even though they've made those positive signings. They look like they've got a pretty good squad together now, and they do look like they could push into the playoffs with a good run of form. They are still the team that even 2-3 weeks ago we were talking about as one that had lessons to learn and still had weaknesses. And yeah, I thought today that was underlined. But when you manage to fight through a performance like that and very nearly get a result out of a game where you weren't anywhere close to your best, that's when it almost stings more that you aren't able to get a result over the line. And given the fact that they were 1-0 up against a team who have really struggled to score goals and who are currently battling relegation in the 91st minute, it does feel like 2 points dropped in a big way. But as you said, it's not just about that one moment. It's about a performance that, on the whole, was pretty poor.
Yeah, I thought they were very. I mean, just to go on to the first stuff, Adam. I just thought they were very lateral. I thought they moved the ball slowly, and they're going to face this, I think, increasingly, particularly over the next month or so, when some teams who are towards the bottom of the Championship come to Carrow Road and they recognise that Norwich City want the ball and they want lots of the ball. They're going to sit in deep blocks. So Norwich City are going to face that game picture a lot more. It's about moving the ball quickly. It's about shifting them from side to side to create some of those openings. And in the first half, it just all felt very flat, one-paced, just didn't quite fit right. I mean, Johannes spoke after the game, and I think he was right in that assessment that he felt that they sort of lost their structure a little bit and players drifted, mainly through frustration. So, I don't think it was Sam didn't say this, but I don't think it was a complacency issue today. I think it was more just what they didn't do on the day, and that is ultimately probably the most frustrating point.
Yeah, I think you could probably go back to plenty of different games and occasions where teams have come to Carrow Road and set up in that manner. Derby's defensive record is actually pretty decent for a team at the bottom relative to some of their other competitors that they're obviously competing against to try and stay in the division. And I think you could see that, in terms of just making themselves solid, hard to beat. And it's about Norwich trying to break them down, and they didn't really do enough in the first half. As you mentioned, the movement was lacking in terms of, when they got themselves into decent positions, that sort of quick pace that we've seen at different points where they managed to cut through teams. And I think that was probably what they required today. Just get on the front foot early doors, try and impose yourself, get the early goal, and then obviously Derby have then got to come out a little bit. And I think we could probably see a sort of replication maybe of that Swansea game where it was almost an exact first half from that game, really, in the way that they just frustrated, sat in, and Norwich couldn't cut them open. But then as soon as you get the goal, obviously that game was kind of changed. I know they equalised pretty quick after in the second half, but then as soon as Norwich got the other one, another goal, bang, they got 5. So I mean, it kind of felt like that could have been what today could have been. But yeah, Norwich really weren't at the races in the first half, and even the second half wasn't a major improvement. But I think you're right to kind of apply the context of looking back at previous games, 7 points from 9, not the worst. It's frustrating given that the context of Derby's poor form going into this game, and without a manager and all the sort of turbulence that would have brought, the fact their window didn't end in a good fashion as well, failing to bring in a striker. So I think opportunity was there today with the starting 11 they had. But then again, opportunity knocks again on Tuesday. Borside is back in the mix, and if we can just get a win there and other results around them, I think a lot of the teams play each other, go for Norwich. If they're in the top 6 come the end of Tuesday night, I don't think anyone's going to be worrying quite so much about the result today. So yeah, tough one to stomach, particularly given the way that they conceded. But opportunity to Knox to push on again from sort of that Tuesday night game onwards.
Yeah, and yeah, thank goodness we haven't got a stew on that for a week, because that would be a hard basket, I think. But I mean, Paddy, we probably got to speak about Jack Stacey and the decision that he made in stoppage time to raise his foot. I mean, Johannes made a good point post game. It's the third penalty concession similar to that one that they've made. The others, you might have to help me here. Ben Crizene against Sheffield United, Jose Cordoba against Middlesbrough being the other two. That is frustrating that we're seeing a a repetitive, I guess, behaviour in the box in key moments, a lack of composure maybe, and probably compounded by the fact that we're talking, we're not talking about a young player here, or we're not talking about a player new to English football. We're talking about a seasoned player who's been really reliable for Norwich City since he joined the club.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to dwell on the individual involved per se, but just a very strange decision in that area of the field, in that time of the game, with the scoreline as it was, young or old player really. Why you feel the need to, as Johannes said, you give the referee, as soon as you've got your foot at head height and you're trying to kick through the ball, then he didn't really need too many seconds to think about it. The whistle was almost in his mouth instantaneously, and it's proved costly in the final analysis. And yeah, that was an interesting aside from Johannes, that he broadened it out to almost a pattern of behaviour, and then in a later answer on that topic, he was talking about almost they'll have to go back and remind the players about it. He talked about, if you go with your body instead of your leg in that scenario, and the other two you've referenced there, the likelihood is you're not giving the referee the same decision to make, and it's almost reprogramming them a little bit. I mean, how difficult that is, I'm not sure at this stage of the season, but the fact that it is a regressive pattern, they certainly need to do something, because Adam's point is right. They could be Tuesday night, if they do the business against Preston, if results go against or in their favour, it back in the top six, first time this season. But equally, if you get to the end of the season and they've missed that, and we know how tight it was last season, different head coach, different players, yes, but they are fine margins. Such a pack of clubs all chasing the same ambition. If you miss out by 2 points, and you're going to look back at this game and think, and it won't be the only game. There'll be other case studies you can put on the table, but it is big, and it feels big tonight, and it could be big in the final analysis, and such a needless giveaway. That's the frustration of it. It wasn't that there's a player running through and you've got to take emergency action, and then hopefully Gunny bails you out from the penalty spot. I mean, really, Jacob Wright hasn't done huge amount there either to hold up Harness in the initial part of that action. So it's not all on Stacey, but it is his error in terms of judgment and then execution that has led to Norwich blowing 2 points tonight. So and he won't need telling that. He's an experienced player, and he's quite an honest individual whenever I've seen him interviewed in the media. Very engaging, very open, very self-effacing, and tonight will be a pretty uncomfortable night for him, I think. I'm not sure he'll get too much sleep.
No, agreed. It was one of those where as soon as the foot went, it almost all happened in slow motion. You could see how it was going to end. Really frustrating for him, and really frustrating for Norwich, because Sam, it could be, as you say, it could be so different. We could be talking about a win where Norwich have been a bit off colour, but wasn't it good character? And isn't it a good sign that you can play like that and win a game of football? But that's not the case. And when you play 46 games, it's inevitable that you're going to have days like this where you don't quite find your rhythm, and you can't blow every team away by 4 or 5. And as we said, you zoom out and it's still 7 from 9. It's not a disaster, and there shouldn't be any sort of overreaction either to Stacey or to the result. But it is hard to shake, I think, what Adam said, that feeling of missed opportunity today. And maybe it's a lesson to, if we needed it. It always feels like when there's so many when there's so many sort of wins in their favour, it always feels like it takes something fairly small to bring the whole thing crashing down.
Yeah, absolutely. It was too good to be true going into it, I think. But for me, what it means going forward is so much down to whether it repeats itself, whether it takes the wind out of their sails, because we know so much of the Championship and the results in this league are about momentum, and if they allow this now to dent what has been a positive run, and everyone was feeling, great about things going into the game, then that will be the real problem with this. Ultimately, if they go and win, I think it's now 6 games against teams who they probably can expect to at least compete with very well, and probably win many of those games. If they go and win all 6 of those, then of course none of us are really that bothered about a point at home against Derby, which isn't great, but of course we can all forget about. The problem now is if the same thing happens against Preston on Tuesday, and of course they've got an example now of how they need to play to try to stop Norwich doing what they want to do. So I think so much of the long-term feeling around this result will come out of what follows it. And of course, everyone's disappointed this evening. You know, it's only natural for after things have been going so well, and with fans who were looking forward to probably seeing a few new signings, maybe one of them get a goal on their debut, and you know, there's all kinds of goodness for us to come on here and analyse. For them not to get what they were expecting will always feel pretty devastating on the night. But the feeling around it will be decided, I think, by these next 6 games and by the performances of those players in those games. So yeah, you're right to say that, you know, we shouldn't all act like it's a disaster, even if it does feel a bit like that. And yeah, I think we have to wait and see what comes in the next few games to sort of really make a decision on it. It's probably more in the next couple of seasons when Norwich will want to achieve things in the short term. They'll want to be pushing for promotion. That's when games like this in isolation can really be a disaster. But yeah, as I said, it's about what follows now, and I'm sure they'll relish the opportunity to put things right on Tuesday night, and yeah, hopefully it looks a lot different.
Yeah, and in a weird way, Adam, to put an uber positive slant on it, and ultimately we won't know, but there is a case from here and a route from here where Norwich City can use today, and they can use the frustrations they've faced against an opponent that employs a certain tactic against them, that deep block and all the frustration that comes with that, as a case study, as an example of what not to do. And there is a world in where Johannes Hoff Thorup and his coaching team, it's probably going to be video analysis rather than sort of contact time on training pitches now before Preston, but you're going to expect Preston to come and replicate, if not as much as Derby, but certainly elements of what Derby did here today. And you would hope that Norwich City, after what they've experienced, they are better equipped to deal with it.
Yeah, I think it's a learning curve for everybody today. You know, Johannes probably put his hands up and admit that he didn't get everything right today, so he can put it, opportunity knocks again on Tuesday to put it right and learn from the mistakes of today. A lot of the players will have obviously personally been disappointed with performance levels today and maybe what they did and didn't do. So I think when they get in that analysis room tomorrow or Monday, then it's pretty clear that they'll know what they didn't do well, as you said, and what needs to be worked on. So it's still a young group. I think Johannes will know that there's going to be moments in this season. He even said it yesterday. There'll be times where things don't go their way in the run-in between now and the end of the season, and they'll also learn from that, and there'll be moments where they do get it right, i.e. last weekend at Watford, where they had to almost a similar situation, 1-0 ahead. I know they were playing 10 men at that stage, but obviously a little bit under the pressure cooker at different points, and they sort of managed that game and managed to see it out in a better fashion. So they've got it in them. These days will happen for every team at every level and across the world at some point. So it's just about making that positive step in the games ahead. And I think with this group and the willingness to learn, the willingness to put 100% in every game, I don't sort of doubt any of those qualities with this squad. So I think Tuesday night they'll hopefully put it all right, and if it's another 3 points, everybody's mood will be lifted again, and the positivity, the confidence, everything that's kind of been echoed, I suppose, before this game, with a Borja Sainz back, with some of the new players maybe getting some minutes, seeing Mate Jurasek, whatever it might be. Yeah, I think that's football really. The highs and lows, the emotions of it can sometimes, you can get caught up in a bad result or a bad performance. And when you look at the broader picture, maybe it isn't actually as bad as it seems on the night.
Yeah, and I always think when you get a result, particularly draws in the Championship, but more when you get those performances where you haven't quite been at your best and you haven't got a result to sort of back up or to mask that or to at least make that process a little bit easier. It's always about the next game, and actually we're probably not going to know really how to look back on this until Tuesday night and after the full-time whistle, because as you say, if Norwich City have won against Preston and we're looking at 4 points from a possible 6 at home and whatever that would be total over the last 4 games, suddenly the whole thing feels a little bit better, particularly if they're in the top 6. Paddy, in terms of Derby, clearly there was a lot that went on for them in the 24 hours that that sort of preceded this game, I suppose, with Paul Warne being sacked, with an interim team being appointed, and everything that comes around that. It was probably inevitable that we saw kind of that sort of response, wasn't it, from them, and probably one that they needed after the run of form that they've been on that ultimately has dragged them into the bottom 3.
Yeah, well, I mean, ultimately, the Derby hierarchy have made that decision in terms of removing Paul Warne because they need to stop the rot, because if they don't, they'll be back in League One, which is where he brought them out of last season. 7 straight league defeats is it's a horrendous spiral of form and results. But from everything anecdotally that I have observed, I don't think that they've. I mean, you look at the results in those 7; they've not been getting hammered. It's not been Plymouth and Wayne Rooney.
Yeah.
Elements of they're so far off it. It has been the odd goal, and you get the sense that those players probably were still pulling for one or a fair proportion of them, and that's the interim chap Matt Hamshaw said after the game today in his media that. There was a lot of devastation in that dressing room when the decision was announced. By all accounts, they were just getting ready to leave Derby to head to Norfolk, and Warne was, I think he said he was called to the owner's house and given the news before they departed. So, that would have been a fairly difficult trip south, and then obviously for Hamshaw and Bradley Johnson and one or two other coaches, to prepare that team to go out and what they did. But I think Johannes' point was well made. I think that probably was still a Paul Warne template and approach because it was far too late in the day. The decision was made Friday afternoon, mid-afternoon. That it was dramatically different from how it would have looked under Paul Warne. But for me, the way those players collectively came together and showed that resilience and that kind of aggressiveness in many ways in terms of their approach. I don't think that was something that's probably been lacking. It's just they've fallen the wrong side too often now for it to be anything other than the end of the road for Paul Warne. And Matt Hamshaw himself said after the game that look, at this level you lose 7 games on the trot. Can you really have too much of an argument? And I don't think Warne can with the timing of it, sure. And the fact it was Norwich, and Hamshaw made the point that he'd spoken to him 6 or 7 times since the decision was made, and clearly very disappointed because he would have had a lot of family, a lot of friends there today cheering him on because we know his Norfolk background, we know his Norwich City background. So of all the games that he was departed from his position on the eve of, I'm sure Norwich would have been at the very bottom of that list he'd have wanted it to come against. But yeah, no, I wouldn't accuse the Derby players of suddenly dredging a performance that hasn't been there, because as I say, from everything you sort of observe from afar, that there hasn't been that surrendering going on. It's just that they've obviously, a squad that's come out of League One have found it very tough going this part of the season. And as a result, they've decided they need to make a change. But there was clearly enough in that performance today, from a Derby perspective, that I think they'll be fine. I think there's 3 worst teams in the division. We've not even got into the nuts and bolts of how that game broke down, but I think their goal was onside by looking at the replays, so they were very hard done by on that one. And if they'd have got themselves up early on, and it would have been maybe even a poorer result from the Norwich perspective. So, yeah, it won't have helped Norwich's cause, certainly, that decision, because it probably has focused the minds of those Derby players with a new, by all accounts, possibly John Eustace coach coming in that they need to impress. But maybe it was also, it was almost, and Hamshaw made this point, it was kind of, maybe their final parting shot for Paul Warne, that, they against his team, that they came out and put on a performance like that and kept going. And even when they went behind, there wasn't that, as we saw with Plymouth maybe when they came here and one or two other teams, that kind of Swansea most recently, that kind of implosion and collapse. They stuck at it, and as frustrating as it is in terms of the manner of the way the goal came, I don't think really, if you were looking at it objectively, you could begrudge Derby getting something from that game on the balance of how that game panned out.
No, completely agree. Let's end the first half of the pod then with just the ticket, because there are some positive elements that we've saved back. Sam, this is our segment in association with First Bus. I actually got on a First Bus this week, which was good, very pleasant experience, and got me to where I wanted to be. So I'd highly recommend. So there we go. Add that in. Not that I need to sell First Bus to anyone, but there we go. Sam, who was just the ticket for you? It's going to be interesting to see when it comes back around to me what I'm going to say. But you've got your first up, so you're a lucky one, I suppose.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, well, in a way, I'm a lucky one. You lot have got more time to think about it, but I think I'm going to go fans. Which, I thought they were actually very good for a lot of the game when probably the entertainment wasn't there. It certainly wasn't good value for money, I don't think, today in terms of the game that they had to watch. But they persisted in trying to get behind the team, even when they didn't get much back for a good long while. And then I thought, although it ended up being relatively futile, they deserved that moment to celebrate with the team when that goal went in. And actually, it's strange because it's obviously a moment that isn't going to live long in the memory, but that felt like quite a big one when finally they broke that massive deadlock. And it did feel like the fans were part of that. I think it would have been very easy for them to go quiet quite early on in that game, given how poor it was entertainment-wise. But you could tell that they felt they had a role to play, and I thought they were pretty loud. And I'm assuming one of you is going to say Josh Sargent as well. And aside from him, there aren't many players that you could single out positively from today. So yeah, I'll give the credit to the fans and say that they were just the ticket.
Very good. I've got one that isn't Josh Sargent, but I suspect is going to get used. Adam, I'm going to come to you next. Who was just the ticket for you this afternoon?
Oh, go Lucy Mahova
Ah,
again.
there we go. That's the one I had.
Yeah, no, I think his general play just doesn't look like a young player that's been thrown in and only played 3 sort of starts for the club. You know, just doesn't look phased, so calm in sort of difficult moments. You know, there was a couple of spells in the first half where a couple of Derby players squeezed him up and no panic. You know, just comfortably continued in what he wanted to do with the ball. No sort of, you know, I suppose you could easily get caught up as a young player and just decide to get rid or panic a little bit, but there doesn't really feel that kind of sense around him. You know, he's very much kind of in the mould and kind of got a similar feeling around maybe when Max Aarons got thrown in. Just that lack of fear, you know, just kind of the willingness to embrace the senior football and what's required from him as an individual, and just the rise. You know, we've spoken on the last couple of podcasts about, you know, the way he's made a move up from the National League North and Boston to Norwich. You know, I mean, that's quite the jump for any footballer, particularly a young player like him, who's, you know, still got so much to learn. And Thorup's, you know, not naive in that, knowing that there's going to be a lot more further steps in there. There probably will be a spell at some point between now and the end of the season where he's going to make a mistake, and it's going to be about, you know, how to pick him up again and, you know, and sort of get that confidence back into him. But at the moment, he doesn't look like a player that's lacking any confidence, and it's just about probably building that stamina up a little bit, because, you know, you can sort of certainly feel maybe around the 70-minute mark it's maybe getting a little bit tiring for him, as Thorup had to make that change today with Kraseni. But yeah, he's long may it continue. If he continues this form, then I think, you know, he's not going to be dropped between now and sort of whenever that might be.
Yeah, and obviously played a really important part in Josh Sargent's goal. And I think it's easy for a young player to see that opening up, to see that pass, and, you know, on your third start for the club, opt not to play it or opt to hold on a bit too long because you're not sure. With him, there was the intent to drive it in there, and yeah, did really well to push that into him. But yeah, his all-round performance, the way there were a couple of moments, as you say, where he was pressed really well in the first half, and he stuck to it. There weren't long balls into the channel that were pretty aimless. They were controlled, and he broke lines really well. And yeah, it's hard not to be anything other than impressed with him, because, you know, I keep sort of saying to myself, well, this one's going to be hard, because, you know, you always think of the second one as the harder one, because you haven't got the adrenaline then, and a few more of the nerves kick in. But he's dealt with that against Musa Sissoko, very physical, imposing player, a lot of experience. You think then the third one might be difficult, but he's taken that in his stride as well. It's a really good run of performances that he's put together at the moment, and yeah, long may it continue. Paddy, I guess you've got the obvious one to take here now, haven't you?
Which is, Connor?
Josh Sargent.
No, I'll leave
No?
you to
Okay.
have that. Well, I mean, you've touched on it, and Adam's touched on it with the player, but, you know, this is our podcast. We make the rules up.
You do?
So my just the ticket is that goal, is the move for that goal, because that was so out of sync with what came before and after it. The quality of that move, the Mahovo pass, the Marcondes pass, the no-look pass, again, very similar to Swansea, similar position in that box where Sargent picks the ball up unmarked, and then the way he smashed it into the roof of the net. You know, that is when you see that football, so incisive, so clinical. That's what you get excited about, thinking that can Thorup and his coaching staff work with these players to extract that on a regular basis, not only game to game but within game. You know, but that unfortunately was an isolated episode today, and, you know, they play like that. With that purpose, they score goals against any team in this division, and that's what I think a lot of fans will cling to those moments, the moments we've seen in some of the other big wins at Carrow Road this season, when it clicks, it's a thing of beauty. And for it to involve Mahovo, very young player, that confidence to snap that ball into Marcondes' feet, and then again, he is such a technically gifted footballer, Marcondes, in and around the box. He sees pictures, and it put me in mind of, what does Thorup always say? He says it's not necessarily about, in this case, Sargent scoring the goals or when Science was on that run. It's about making the right decisions to create the best possible goal-scoring opportunity, and that was the perfect example of that today. So for me, because it was so out of sync with what else we had to endure, that was just the ticket, that winning goal, the move.
Yeah, I think it's hard to disagree with any of that, and it's probably I'm sure Emi Marcondes would say this as well. Probably the one bit of quality that he produced all afternoon as well, because it wasn't his best display all told. He wasn't the only one, to be fair. So I'm surprised that it hasn't been taken, but I'll take Josh Sargent then. Obviously 4 in 3 for him. I think it's always a good sign of a striker. Twofold really. I think the fact that in a game like that where it would have been so easy for him to drop deep and come looking for the ball, and then that obviously can be detrimental to Norwich in terms of losing that sort of spearhead. The fact he didn't do that, the fact he kept disciplined, was probably one of the few in that sort of attacking setup that did, against what was a very tough task against 3 very physically imposing, capable Derby centre-backs. I thought the Norwegian lad looked very good, actually. Of the 3, Matt Clark is very experienced at this level as well. That was a very difficult task for him, and the fact to stay disciplined. And then I always think it tells a lot about a striker where they haven't had a lot of service, they haven't had a lot of opportunities, and yet the one that they have, they take. And it was a really unnecessary finish, to be honest, how he took it to stick it in the top corner. But I think that speaks to him and where he's at the moment. And spoke to him after the game. He's got confidence flowing through him. He clearly feels sharp. It was his first 90 minutes as well. Don't underestimate how big that is for him. And he's come back and made the impact that we probably hoped he would, but maybe feared he wouldn't, because of obviously so long on the sidelines. He looks sharp, he looks fresh, and in those moments in front of goal, I think everyone probably knew when Marcondes slipped him in where it was going to end up, and it was a really devastating finish. So Josh Sargent, just the ticket for me. Luckily, that's that game done now. We can put it in a box. We don't ever have to talk about it again, hopefully, because they'll hopefully go on and beat Preston, and we can talk about all those positive elements. But second half of the pod, we're going to look at obviously the transfer window, and we're going to delve into some of the selection headaches. Welcome this time, as opposed to what has been the case over the course of this season for Johannes Hoff Thorup. Join us in a second. Welcome back to the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast, brought to you in association with First Bus, who are, thankfully, we've left the 1-1 draw with Derby in the rearview mirror. We're going to press on with some of the other issues, of course, ahead of another busy week for Norwich City. Preston to come on Tuesday before a trip to Hull next weekend. And I think, Paddy, let's start by reflecting on the end to the transfer window, because since we last recorded, Norwich City have got 2 in the door in terms of newcomings, another one officially in the door after signing earlier in the month in Mate Jurasek. How do you reflect on the window as a whole? It obviously finished with a flourish from a Norwich City perspective, but 5 additions, average age of 20.8. It felt like another turning of the wheel in terms of their overall strategy.
And that's the benchmark. What is the strategy? We know what the strategy is. Both Johannes and Ben Napper have mapped it out since the start of the season, before the start of the season. So, rated against that, then very successful window. Johannes, when I asked him on Friday, said, very satisfied with that. Topped off with the 2 young lads they did on deadline day. Premier League quality, or Premier League educated, 2 young players. But obviously, as with all of these things, we're far too close to the close of the window. Jacob Wright's got on today, but McConville hasn't. Jurasek hasn't got on. So, we can't judge, and nor anymore can we really judge Schwartau, Cernach, Forsen as successful business, because it probably needs a full season, really, because it's quite a unique challenge coming from certainly abroad into the Championship. So that is something we'll park for now. But in terms of business, in terms of going and refreshing the squad, lowering the age profile, as you touched on, letting Hanley, letting Barnes, letting Fashnak go, both in terms of profile of age, but also salary as well. Very important factor now, post-parachute payment. Yeah, it's hard to envisage, particularly in a January window, which, as we know, is usually very difficult to source players in terms of availability. I don't really think they could have done much more than they did, really, as a trading block. But obviously now it's, the proof in the recruitment will be how these players, the incoming ones, how they adapt, and how soon they start to show that, they are going to be upgrades on what has been here before, and key elements of pushing this club forward now to a team squad club competing at the right end of the championship. But you look at the pedigree of these signings, and it feels quite exciting. It certainly feels fresh, and following on from the summer window, I don't think there's any ambiguity now. We know exactly what Thorup and Napa are trying to do with this squad and what direction they're trying to take it in. And if it comes off, it'll be a hell of a ride.
And what's McConville's first name?
Rurari.
Correct. Yeah.
Go with that?
Yeah, correct. That's according to a club document in the programme. And it's also Mate,
not Rory.
Definitely not Rory, no. Ruari. And we're going with Jurasek, which is, again, how it's broken down. Don't shoot us with just the messages, but that is...
What about Jacob Wright?
You've nailed that. There you go. If anyone needed
I'm a linguist.
There you go. Sam, I guess maybe a strand that I think hasn't maybe been picked out too much since the close of the January window, and there's obviously been a lot of them. The fact that this feels probably like maybe the first window that I can think of in a little while. I'm sure maybe there are other examples where Norwich City have been able to invest in talent without seeing a major exit, without seeing a player have to go to fund that, or that being the narrative at least. They spent 5.8 on Jurasek. They what was it, 1 million up front from McConville, right, along with an option. They've invested in young talent without having to part with a Josh Sargent, a Borja Science, and that again probably shows where they're at as a club at the moment, obviously supported by Mark Atanasio's group.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it's a theme I've seen a lot of fans sort of picking out from the window, and it probably does apply to the summer as well. Obviously, Gabriel Sara went, and Adamida and John Rowe, and they were able to raise some funds, but even when they've done that previously, we've seen players, when Norwich are in the Championship, they've been buying players for 1 million, 2 million, 3 million. They can go out and buy Ante Cianas for 8.5, and a couple of others in the sort of 4 to 6 million bracket as well. So yeah, I think we have seen the financial power that Atanasio can bring. Obviously, there are the financial rules and regulations that they need to adhere to, as well as the fact that they need to be able to attract these players to Carrow Road. So you're probably not going to see 15, 20 million pound players, but it is certainly a step up from where the investment has been at Norwich previously, and it's probably exactly what fans wanted to see, because when that news first broke about Atanasio, of course, the first thing is people mocking up pictures of Mbappe in a Norwich shirt and dreaming of windows where they sign multiple players for more than 40 million. And it did take a bit of time to really see the full impact that Atanasio and his group could have financially on the club. But now that they have sort of majority control, it does feel like with Ben Napa in charge of those transfers and with a very clear direction of where they want to go, funding isn't going to be an issue. It's more those regulations probably become a consideration for Napa before whether the club actually has the money to go and do a deal. And that does mean a lot, especially when you're trying to start something. And what it tends to mean is that obviously you never know for sure how good a player is going to be, but you can have a little bit more of that certainty when you're buying players like that. When you're buying players for 500,000, 1 million, they're players who you do believe have the talent to go on and be really good Championship players, but you're pretty unsure. Whereas when you're getting to the fees that Norwich are spending at the moment, it's because there are signs in their career previously that there's an 85-90% chance that they're going to go on to be really good Championship players, and that probably gives a level of stability and assurance to the club that there hasn't been previously. If you go back to 2018 when Emi Buendia or Teemu Pukki was signed there wasn't any guarantee that they were going to go on to be the players that they were. Obviously, there always would have been the hope, but it quite easily could have ended up being another mid-table season. But I think with these players, they might not have a guarantee that they're going to finish in the top 2 places in the next 2 seasons. But they probably have a decent expectation that they'll be in and around the top 6 at the least. So, yeah, I think it gives this current sort of project, what Napa's trying to do, it gives it a little bit more stability and a little bit more reliability, and of course that's very helpful when you're a club like Norwich trying to build something for the future. And yeah, as I've seen plenty of people highlight, I think Atanasio's impact was really tangible in the January window.
Yeah, I mean, he said it off the AGM, didn't he? They're now able to take sporting decisions. If they sell a player, it's for sporting reasons or rather than a financial necessity. That's a much healthier position to be. It doesn't mean Norwich aren't going to sell players. They are. That's going to be a major part of their strategy. It will come into play in the summer. I'm convinced of that. But obviously, when you sell those players, it allows you to recruit and you keep that conveyor belt going. And clearly, Norwich City want to become a club that does player trading and does a lot of it and does a high volume of it, and that means sort of developing these players into assets that you can sell. And Adam, the wider point, which is probably linked to that in to an extent. I mean, I wrote a column on this for Saturday's paper. You compare where they were a year ago under David Wagner. I think it was January last year. They played QPR. They fielded a team with an average age of 30.3, I think, which was a championship high. The 2 oldest teams in the Championship last season were fielded by Norwich. They were the 4th oldest team in the division across, obviously, the average age of their squad. There were 2 under-21s, Rowe and Gibbs, who played more than 15 games. I think they had 12 30-plus-year-olds in their squad at the peak of it. They've now got 4. They've doubled the amount of under-21s who've played 15 games already. We're not even talking about a season. The transformation, I think now they're the 4th youngest squad as opposed to the 4th oldest. So the transition that they've gone through over the past year to really shift and to really change and really pivot their strategy is quite remarkable, really. I think certainly internally the feeling is that they're one of the biggest movers from sort of old to young. Obviously, we're talking old in football. 30 isn't old, but in football terms, from old to young, it's pretty drastic what they've done in the last 12 months.
Yeah, I think it's almost gone under the radar just how much work has actually been done, and just how big a shift there's been in terms of this group and the way it looks and the way it feels and sort of the buy-in from the fans. I mean, anybody that was at some of those games last year, I mean, I'll be honest with you, the excitement levels of when I see Danny Bart and Adam Forshaw in a Norwich shirt is quite drastically different to when I see Matej Jurasek warming up down the
If anyone does want to get Adam a season ticket to watch Blackburn every week, they're more than welcome to do that.
But I just think certainly in the short term, I think we all know and probably acknowledge that there's going to be mistakes for some of these players. It's going to take time, but with the sort of longer to mid to longer term view that when these players eventually hopefully reach their potential and Norwich can nurture them to what they're obviously trying to do for the longer term, then I think it's exciting. And you sort of mentioned some of the fees for some of the players and some of the route that these players have taken. Callum Doyle, Man City's academy, and I mean they'd have obviously been learning from arguably one of, if not the greatest manager at that current time in Pep Guardiola, and the fact that Norwich can attract that, I think this time last year, if you'd have probably tried to recruit some of those individuals with David Wagner in charge and the players they had on the books, I can't see it being as an attractive proposition as what it is now. And yeah, I think if you're a Norwich fan, you can only be excited about what's ahead of you, particularly moving into the summer. I mean, inevitably there'll be some more moving parts and individuals will leave the building. There'll be players arrive, and I think it'll be another clear statement of the individuals they bring in will be of a similar profile, and they'll try and fit to what Thorup's trying to do. And I think eventually they'll evolve this team to hopefully be able to fully equipped and do what he wants, because there's obviously still elements and certain individuals that probably don't quite fit what Thorup's trying to do. I'm not going to name them because I think it's quite obvious, but I mean, McConville feels like the natural, successor to Shane Duffy, for example, and obviously they'll probably have to do a goalkeeper and stuff. So there's obviously going to be more changes, but eventually at some point, hopefully it will all click, and it will, Norwich will then eventually have a squad where, again, the assets, they're there to be sold because they're of an age where, eventually if Norwich do need to move them on for their own benefit of their career and they make a next step, then Norwich will benefit from that, because ultimately the fee will be a substantial one, because they're on Norwich's books on longer term deals. A lot of these players, the fact they're now signing players with deals of 2030. That let's be honest with you, when they're signing Adam Forshaw, nobody wants him until 2030. So it's probably a positive sign. Obviously the proof's in the pudding. These players have still got to provide on the pitch. We'll see with time. But I think you can only be positive and excited about this window as a whole and what Norwich have done over the last 12 months.
I love that.
When we talk about being able to attract players that maybe they wouldn't have previously, Jacob Wright is a perfect example of that, given he's basically choosing between Swansea and Norwich on deadline day. I think Johannes sort of alluded to this without wanting to dwell too much on Swansea in his pre-match press conference. But when you're a lad from Manchester who's going to the Championship for the first time, realistically, as much as we might have yellow and green tinted spectacles, what difference is Swansea to Norwich for you as a club? They're both in the Championship. It's they're both probably fairly similarly sized. The difference for him was probably the project that Norwich have, the fact that they love to blood young players, the style of play that suits him. And I think that was a really good example. As Adam said, probably those sorts of deals, him and Callum Doyle don't get over the line this time. Last year when David Wagner's in charge, and it doesn't look like there really are the opportunities for the young players. But I thought Jacob Wright was actually the perfect example of why it's so ideal in the long term to have that sort of pathway.
Yeah, agreed, Adam. I was just going to ask you: is everything all right? Has Adam Forshaw done something personally to you, or is just the example?
Just his performance levels last season and what we had to endure. I think we can, throw a little bit of shade, I suppose, his way. But nothing against him personally. I've never had any dealings with him, but just not a great footballer in my opinion.
He was involved in the FA Cup Bristol Rovers game, wasn't he? To send us to Bristol Rovers on that cold night.
That's a good
That's
reason.
enough to hold against anyone, I think. So there we go. And Paddy, I don't want to sort of labour the point about David Wagner because we committed far too many minutes to him and everything at Norwich City last season. So I don't necessarily want to reopen that, but it probably does underscore and underline when you sort of go through some of the statistics that I've reeled off and where Norwich City are at generally, why they did have to move on, irrespective of whether you thought he did a good job, bad job, an indifferent job last season. They clearly did need to pivot to something new in terms of this strategy, because the stats show him not. I'm trying to be kind, but the stats show him not to be someone who necessarily was as faithful in young players.
That's very diplomatic, that one, Connor. No, he definitely wasn't as faithful as Johannes and Ben in terms of blood in young players. As you were talking there, I'm thinking straight after the Leeds game, morning of, David Wagner dispensed with his services, and the quote from Ben Napper in the club statement was, "We're going in a new direction or a different direction," and that's all you need to know as to why he didn't feel aligned with David Wagner. He obviously inherited David Wagner when he came in midway through last season. Not a marriage made in football in heaven, it's safe to say, and I think it's safe to say that change would have been enacted a bit sooner at the back end of last season if Johannes had been available and they could have got him through the door and all the work permit regulations and what have you. So, he was on borrowed time for quite a considerable amount of time. Josh Sargent's goals have probably masked a lot of the deficiencies in terms of style of play, in terms of that age profile that you've mapped out, in terms of really not offering pathways for young players, certainly to the volume that they are now getting. And once in very short order the season was done at Leeds in that second leg of the playoff, then he was gone. And once you're appointing Johannes Thorup with his reputation at Nordsjælland, you know what's in front of you. And I wasn't aware quite it was as graphic as that until you mapped out them stats. But to go from fourth oldest to fourth youngest in 2 windows is some effort. And it's only going to go one way from here, because guaranteed this coming summer it'll be more of the same, and I think on a grander scale as well. So by the time they kick off next season, irrespective of how this one ends, we are firmly going to be on that new direction, down that new path that Napper intimated post Wagner's dismissal.
Yeah, I was just trying to pull up while you were speaking there the team that played against QPR. I vividly remember asking David about it post game and him sort of shrugging off the average age element of it. but that was what, January, February time.
November, I think.
No, was it November, December time? Yeah, here we go. I found it. It was November the 25th. So yeah, for just to sort of really hammer home Norwich City's team that day, if I can get it up, which I can. They had, so I'll read you the starting 11. So it's Long in goal, Stacey, Duffy, Bart, Yanulis as the back four, McLean, Sarah, Fashnax, Barnes, Hernandez and Huang. What are you laughing for? So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 players who were 30 or over in that game. You had Stacey, Yanulis, Sarah, who were the only ones who were 20. I mean, Jack Stacey's gone from one of the youngest players for Norwich City to one of the oldest. But yeah, that was the shift from there is remarkable. Sam, let's move on to the here and now though, because Norwich City, as we mentioned at various times in this pod, have players coming back. We saw some of them today. They've got new faces. And that means really interesting decisions in terms of squad selection, because we saw Jakob Sorensen, who started at Watford this week, couldn't even make the match day squad. Given Borja Sainz is back on Tuesday, you wouldn't like to assume, but I think we do assume that he will be back in the starting 11 and in the squad. That's going to be another player to leave out. Oh, now Hernandez has got to come back from injury. Liam Gibbs, Emmanuel Forson, Gabriel Forsyth. There's some really welcome but tough decisions that Johannes has got to make in the coming weeks.
Indeed, and that midfield area probably highlights it more than any when you think you've already got players having to miss out from the matchday squad. And as you mentioned, Emmanuel Forson, Liam Gibbs, Gabriel Forsyth all coming back and in that position. It's going to be tough, I think, for Thorup to be breaking all of that bad news, in such a short space of time, probably every week. So yeah, it does show the strength in depth that the club have now. It probably makes it slightly more difficult for teams to predict them as well, and also for us to predict what the starting 11 is going to be. But yeah, I think they have options in a lot of areas, and it's now for Thorup about sort of nailing down what that best 11 looks like. It does have that strange sort of feel of almost a pre-season, because obviously throughout the season I'm sure Thorup has worked out who his best players are, but you still look at certain areas and you wonder who fits in and how everyone fits in together. That midfield area that I mentioned, it's not just I was going to say problem. I think it's a sort of problem that Thorup probably wants. It's not just a decision around the edges. It's also, within that three that he likes to play with, he's got to fit Marcondes, Slimane, I'm trying to think who's the one I'm missing out. Nunez and Wright as well. He's got to fit all of those players. Slimane, did I mention as well?
McLean.
So McLean, did I mention? I don't know. But there's 5 players there basically who
They've got lots of midfielders.
They've got loads of midfielders, and one day we'll do a quiz where we have to name all of them. But they've got 5 players there who I think have a reasonable expectation based on performances and their status when they came into the club of starting games, and Thorup has to leave 2 of those out. So there's that. There's also the right wing position where Anse Sienats is going to come under a lot of pressure from Matej Jurasek. That was right, wasn't it?
Brilliant, yeah.
Thank you very much. And yeah, Lewis Dobbin, who's been pretty good, I think, since signing for the club. Now, it's probably, unfortunately, going to be on the bench pretty quickly. So, yeah, it shows you the amount of quality that they've got there. It shows you the decisions that Thorup has to make. And it also, hopefully, results in even better performances, because every single player in that team, maybe, to be honest, barring Angus Gunn, will feel that their position is absolutely up for grabs, and it's up to them to prove that they are in that best 11. But it'll be really interesting in maybe 6 or 8 weeks what that team looks like and what Thorup makes of it, because there are a lot of players currently vying for it, and I think predicting the 11 over the next few games is going to be pretty tough.
It is indeed. Adam, I think we'll probably expect there to be some rotation on Tuesday anyway, and that's probably just from sort of bench to starting 11. With Sainz coming back, it's not just going to be Sorensen, there's going to be someone else that's going to miss out. Who do you think that would be?
I would guess one of the defending options on the bench today. Maybe McConville at this stage, just because he's still just through the door and still young, and I think probably more of a longer term view, or maybe Krasene if you feel that Dor could operate as a left back. If you needed that option, obviously you could throw Cordoba in and switch Dor to left back, so maybe that opens the door there a little bit, because I think you'd be a bit naive, as much as you can put Stacey under fire today for what he's done, but that experience that's kind of on the bench, you do kind of need that, and he does give you a slightly different option going forwards if you require that from a right back point of view. So I think it'd be difficult to drop those out. You could argue maybe one of the midfielders as well. I think there is a few areas, but I'm just quite looking forward to having a few more natural attacking options on the bench, because as much as we've spoken around the excitement of having loads of players on the bench and different options, it kind of lacked that attacking option today. I mean, Jurasek obviously didn't get on, but I think just throwing a Dobbin on the bench who can come on and offer a bit more an explosive pace if Norwich are trying to, or need a goal, need to find a goal, or want to try and change it up a little bit. They didn't really have that to do today, to roll the dice, which, in a game like today where they need to try and break it down and find that goal, not having sort of a natural attacking option other than him, who's obviously only been in the building for a matter of days, was a little bit tough. So when they get that dynamic right, and maybe there's that more sort of better balance, I suppose, on the bench of defensive, midfield, attacking options, then I think this team has got an exciting few months ahead.
Absolutely. And finally, Paddy, to close it off, probably expect some changes on Tuesday. Where do you see them coming? I mean, we're probably expecting Science to come straight back in, unless you sort of feel differently.
No, I think while Dobbin has shown glimpses, and obviously we're talking Science tapering off into and the other side of the Christmas period, but you would think he would have a point to prove, if nothing else, against Preston, and would be desperate to try and get back to those levels of productivity. And if he can produce that, and at least convince Johannes that he can produce that, then he'll be back in. I think I'm right in saying he's still joint top scorer.
No, top scorer.
Still top scorer. So I mean, that's ridiculous, really. It underlines how impressive those numbers were pre him tapering off a little bit. So I'm trying to think now logically, where else would you go?
Would you bring a Jurasek in?
I would.
On the right?
I would. Yeah. I'd say, there's the bench. Sit on that for a little while. Well, let's be honest. Today wasn't an isolated incident. He's not been good enough of late. There is a player in there, but in the here and now, if it is the short term, can they get in and around the playoffs? I'm not sure you'd hang your hat on him producing you the end product. So
about midfield, in terms of we saw Nunez, probably unlikely he's going to go again Tuesday.
Yeah,
So how do you see
Slimani.
that?
I think he'll go Slimani, Marcondes, McLean. I think I don't see the Schwarthouse, Wright, Sorensen coming back in. I wouldn't see them, because I think while there are a lot of those central midfield options now, I think he's still in the pecking order. It's McLean, it's Nunez, it's Slimani, and it's Marcondes, and it'll be 3 from 4 for the foreseeable, I think, barring any injuries or anything else. So, I think that makes sense. Given Nunez is only just back in, to flog him again on Tuesday wouldn't make a lot of sense when you've got those options. So, I think Slimani, Jurasek, and Science for me. I don't think defensively. Well, let's be honest, Jack Stace hasn't advanced his claims to come back in ahead of Fisher, has he? So, so I think three would be about right for me. What about you, boys?
Yeah, I think I'm with you. It was clear the Nunez 60, Slimani 30 thing was very deliberate today, so I'd expect that to be probably reversed on Tuesday night. I think, shout if you boys have any other changes, but I think that's probably how we see it. Of course, you can let us know as well how you see it going. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can comment, or you can message us on the various social medias. There's plenty of, I sound about 80 saying that, but there's plenty of them. And of course, we move on to Preston in midweek under the lights at Carrow Road. Thankfully, we can hopefully get this one out of everybody's system very, very quickly. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for watching. And we will, of course, see you next weekend post, hopefully, 2 Norwich City wins against Preston and Hull. See you then.